This morning, I'd like to speak about perseverance and use Nehemiah's life as a backdrop to our discussion this morning. Harry, if you can have the first clip ready. Not yet. Don't play it yet. I'll just let you know. We've just come through an extremely difficult year. And we've been faced with probably some of the most euphoric moments in our lives when we saw two young men that were going through some difficulties, really and truly just excelling and doing so well. We've seen our students in the class, in the congregation, just doing so well, studying hard, the kind of results achieved under adverse conditions gives us that feeling of excitement, but also a deep appreciation of who God is and thanking Him that He has been so good to us. I want you to imagine a beautiful day at the beach, a day that is spectacular. Sun's right, you've got your sunscreen on, your favorite bathing costume on, lovely pair of slip-slops, and you've got your sun umbrella and your favorite sun beach chair. Everything is going to be perfect. And isn't that really how we envision life? We often envision life as being wonderful. We've been accepted into our favorite school. We've met the woman of our dreams, and we have an amazing marriage. She cooks the best meals. We buy the perfect house in the perfect neighborhood where everybody is just kind and everything, like Glenn would say, is peachy. And then we embark on our career and we have promotion after promotion so often. And we move from having a humble home to a better home and better car, and we start to make things that just makes our life comfortable, that also reflects the glory of God. We also envision having children that are well behaved and respectful. We're also grateful to a dog that doesn't pee on the carpet. But as we get older, we hope also that it would just be wonderful. We'll have grandkids. They live in the same town, and we'll sit down and have family dinners, and we'll just enjoy things to the most wonderful nth degree. And we envision life to be around about the 50s, when we'll travel the world, and we will be able to then enjoy life and wait for God. And then we envision the way that we will pass on into eternity is just fall asleep with no pain, and everything will be well. But it's not actually the way it works. And that's where Harrison comes in.
Oh yeah, that's great.
I saw it coming up there. Whoa! Are you okay? Are you okay?
Gone. Nice job. Do-
Whoa! Are you okay?
Awesome. Got it.
Uh-oh, this is good.
You're okay.
Isn't that really how life is? Everything is going great. You're walking out in the sun. Everything is just set to just go wonderful in life. And then suddenly, the reality of life hits you. One wave after another knocks you down. You're just about to recover, and another one hits you. Maybe you feel that I can't find that perfect spouse. And so you end up really being single for a long time. You get married and you think, I've got the perfect spouse, and it turns up to be a nightmare. Things can be rough and it ends in divorce. You sometimes think you've got the perfect children, and then they turn out to be physically or educationally challenged, or even they turn out to be prodigals. They're either running from you or they're running from the Lord. And these things are hard, but those are the realities of life. You sometimes think you're going to travel and take it easy, but something happens, and it changes the way that you've envisioned life. We looked at what has just happened these last 2 years. Nobody could have imagined what we were going to have to experience. We just think that we're coming to the fourth wave and it's going to be great, and COVID hits and you find yourself getting sick. And as I said to a friend of mine, COVID's the gift that keeps on giving. It gives you chest problems, it gives you nasal things, you've got sinuses, and then you discover that it's affected your eyes, and so this COVID just sticks around and just lingers. But there's an old Japanese proverb that says you fall 7 times and you get up 8. And that really is what it means. You don't go lie down. In fact, you get up 70 times 7 times. But there's some things that we have noticed with hardship, is that sometimes it happens, and after about the 3rd day, that which becomes unbearable, we tend to be able to handle. And then we think that after a while, the pain goes away and it replaces with excitement, and we think that everything is going to go great. It's a little bit about like Jesus. We saw the disciples when Jesus Christ says, I have to go and I have a baptism to undergo, and he was talking about his crucifixion. We see that he's crucified, he dies, he's buried, and then he was raised again. The disciples are so excited. And then something happens. He stays with them for 40 days and he speaks to them about the kingdom, and then he disappears. In other words, we find the same kind of nuance of happiness, unhappiness, elation, disappointment occurring in our human life. We also find it sometimes in people that have got serious illnesses. It just happens when they feel that they're over it, and then there's another bout of it that comes their way. It is a really tough thing because we feel like those waves that were hitting those people, it just comes and persecutes relentlessly. I've been watching sometimes wonderful people, godly people, really going through difficult times. And those who bring the difficulties, they do not care. Whether you are crying or whether you're going through difficulty where you lie awake at night, they don't care. You see, I thought about us as a congregation. Wherever we go in this community, people appreciate what you do. People recognize that you are making a difference in very difficult circumstances. They recognize that although we are relatively small, we make a difference where it does matter. But could you imagine if they should turn against us? How different the game would be. And so is the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a wonderful story, and maybe this year, as you are progressing through it and filled with the elation of new prospects and the new me kind of thing for your new career, I want you to go through this year well prepared. Well prepared and being able to stand as a man and a woman that knows that despite how bad the story goes, God is with you. Firstly, let me give you the backstory. The unfaithfulness of Israel sent them into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. And they were allowed to return in stages, first under Zerubbabel, and then we know under Nehemiah and Ezra. But when the first captives returned, they had to literally rebuild the entire Jerusalem. I was fortunate to see parts of Jerusalem, parts of those walls, the very walls that were rebuilt by Nehemiah and the team. The temple was destroyed. Their homes were destroyed. The wall that protected them were destroyed. And here we find a man that is called by God, Nehemiah, eventually gets all the materials and he returns to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, according to Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 6, which was read by Ian, he says the people had a mind to work. They worked with all their heart. They worked hard. They first constructed the sheep gate, and then they constructed the fish gate. And what they did is quite profound as you learn to learn this and read the story of Nehemiah and also the accounts in other documents about that reconstruction, that what they did was they took it piece by piece. They carefully reconstructed that building side by side with one family next to the other. But beside having to deal with the difficulties of the physical labor, they then had to change gears because the Jews had to then deal with opposition from their enemies. Beside the complexity of what they're having to deal with, they now had to deal with opposition. And here's the key: if you want to live as a Christian in a world that is flowing downstream and you are flowing upstream in a downstream world, how do we as God's people remain focused on Him? By opposition, I'm not saying that people maybe don't like you. I'm talking about opposition that persistently frustrates and undermines your work. Where you are trying to achieve a career inside of your discipline, and there is some clown that just sits there and grinds away trying to complicate your life. It threatens your perseverance as well as your faith. It also undermines the work in the ministry and what you're trying to achieve. And then ultimately it can tempt you to give up and walk away. But what is very, very important is to know and understand what God wants for you to do. A clear understanding of what God's assignment is in your life. Nehemiah begins in chapter 2, and he said, so they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it. They laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you are doing?" And then they tried to pull the authority card. Are you trying to rebel against the king? In chapter 4, we also find that there are other troublemakers within this community. Beside the man trying to build the wall, there are some folk behind the scenes trying to complicate their lives. In chapter 4, we find that these troublemakers show up again. And it so happened when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria. And then he started mocking them and says, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stone from heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Here Sanballat and his posse gathers together and basically says to them, the project is too big for you. Isn't that really what we have to encounter every day of our lives? Maybe you've just started on your studies this year, and some clown comes on and he says to you, "You know what, I don't think this discipline is for you. I just don't think, I love you, but I don't think you've got the brain power for it." You see, those kind of undermining will happen to you this year. In fact, what they say is this clown, Sanballat, his buddy, comes and he says, "Well, you know, he's like a schoolyard bully. Walks around behind the scenes," and he then says, he tags old Tobiah, and he says in chapter 4, verse 3, "Whatever they build, even if a fox goes up against it, he'll break down the stone wall." They start to look at what you're doing, how hard you are working. You're working on a very difficult assignment, and they walk around and say, "Pah, that is just not good enough." You know, and says to you, "Well, you know, I don't think that'll make the grade." You see, sarcastic comments might come your way this year. But you must understand that there is a spiritual context to all of us who strive to live as children of God, who strive to do not what is right in the eyes of the world, but to do what is righteous in the sight of an awesome God. Those of us who live in the shadow of the cross, deep regard for the Holy Spirit that lives within us, constantly aware that you and I are under instruction and under the authority of an awesome God. Well, they did it to Jesus, didn't they? When Jesus Christ was on the cross, he said, "You know what? Excuse me, you're on the cross at the moment. You said you were going to do what? You were going to rebuild the temple in 3 days. Okay, right." They did it to him. What makes you think that they're not going to do it to you? They looked at Jesus Christ on the cross and said, "You don't really look like a king now, do you?" But you see, those things are going to happen. Many years ago, I was privileged to sit in a meeting with Uncle Bob. And I know Uncle Bob is listening today, and I'll never forget that day. As a congregation, I think we've taken about 4 or 5 stabs at World Bible School. Man, I tell you something, we really tried to make it work. Everything we did, it just didn't work. And I'll never forget Uncle Bob saying, "Let me give it a go." I tell you, after months, we had it translated into Afrikaans. We battled to get translators. Folks started half working on it and working on it. Some folk did amazing work, did large tracts of this translation into Afrikaans. And it was to fulfill a unique, specific niche. I know Reg, his cousin, was involved, or somebody he knew very well that helped us edit and translate into Afrikaans. And then we printed it, and that was the story. And over the years, very soon, we had 3,000 students. And you see, many folk around would have looked at him. I mean, Uncle Bob, for crying out loud, was a retired cat. There were many other people that have tried this thing and it hadn't worked. Superstars that have walked in here as missionaries. Uncle Bob, a man that worked for 70 years or whatever, how many years he worked, and he was retired. I mean, what could Bob do? But you see, Bob thought differently. He saw God's hand in his life, and soon all of us who saw what Bob saw, we were in. And now this whole process has graduated to New Life Behavior, which the 27th is coming up. We've watched how it's morphed under the difficulties where we've been opposed. I remember sitting one day talking to Uncle Bob, and I did 2 prisons, and the guys were still waiting at another prison gate, where a specific lady that heads the spiritual side said, "No, we have received no letter from you." And I'll never forget Uncle Bob saying to them, "Ma'am, I have sent you that email." And as I looked on her desk, I pointed out, "There's Bob's signature on your desk." I said, "Don't try to hide it. Bob has sent you a message, and he's made an appointment that is confirmed in your email on your desk." And then we went in. But beside the opposition, he still kept going. The prison doors were closed to us on COVID, and we realized through other men that says, we're going to make it work. And we're going to change gears, and we're going to re-engineer this thing to be even more effective. And so we find that when you achieve discouragement, in whatever you are doing, and opposition, you cannot go lie down and think that this is the end of the story. Let's see how Nehemiah and the Jews responded. How do you respond to this kind of constant discouragement? How do you respond beside wanting to step up and take the person's jaw out? Well, might be the best move, and you might feel greatly satisfied, or what they call Schadenfreude, but that's not the way that godly people respond. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 4 through 5 tells us how Nehemiah responded when he was insulted, blamed, and he was castigated by people that had no right to say what they did. Nehemiah prayed, "Hear, O God," and I want you to listen very, very carefully. The import of what this man is doing is taking his eyes off those people and placing it on God and say, "Lord, I want you to hear what these people are saying." He also places a request and says, "Turn their reproach on their head and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity. Do not let their sin be blotted out before you, for they have provoked," listen carefully, "you to anger before the builders." There's a few things in this text that you've got to get. It's about God. It's about His work that's been undermined. It's about His intentionality to transform society for His goodwill that's being undermined. It is about Him, not about you. Nehemiah's first response, he starts to pray. He did not say to God, well, what he does say to God is, "Lord, these people are a thorn in my flesh. They are interrupting the work that I'm going to do for your glory." I want you to listen how David responds in Psalms 109, verse 1. He says the following, "My God, whom I praise, do not remain silent. For people who are wicked and deceitful have opened their mouths against me. They have spoken against me with lying tongues." Brethren, when people lie about you and they question your integrity, they tell you what you supposedly are thinking and feeling, you can say, "Lord, you know that it's not true." With words of hatred, they surround me. They attack me without cause. In return for my friendship, they accuse me. But I am a man of prayer. They repay evil for good and hatred for my friendship. Appoint somebody evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. May his days be few. May another take his place in leadership. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined houses. May a creditor seize all he has, and may strangers plunder the fruits of his labors. This comes out of Scripture. I'm not quite sure if I want to pray that kind of prayer. But that's how it works. I want you to see what God says to Isaiah in Isaiah 54, verse 16 to 17. He said, "See, it is I who created the blacksmith, who fans the coals into flame and forges a weapon fit for its work. And it is I who have created the destroyer to wreak havoc." And then he promises this to his children. He says, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you'll refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of my servants, and this is your vindication from me, declares the Lord." Let liars lie. Let they say what they need to say, and let them have joy in celebrating the complexity that you are being faced with. But you remain focused. If I looked at the life of Jesus, and I want to just refer to it very briefly, and that as I was sitting and just praying just now, I remember about Jesus. And the passage is in 2 Peter chapter 2, from verse 2, where he says, "He committed no sin. No deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly." And brethren, that is the answer for us. Don't answer. Don't try to go into a bun fight with a fool. Don't try to go into a bun fight with someone that is an expert at trying to break down other people. Let God deal with him. He never went into a shouting match with Sanballat. He never went in to try to beat them at their own game. He trusted God. When we go through life, we never expect opposition. But maybe mentally you will be tempted to respond in anger, despair, fear, and anxiety and hopelessness. Go to God. Go to God. Speak to him. You see, Jesus Christ himself said, "If I'm your Lord and they've done this to you, they've treated me like this, how in the world do you think they're going to treat you? Do you think they're going to treat you any better? No." But you see, what Jesus Christ is trying to say to you is that it's going to be okay. Paul Tripp writes a book about marriage, and he says, in this book is titled, "What Did You Expect?" And the idea here is where he takes the mask off people that are getting married, and maybe that's your objective this year. We're all imperfect people. But the excitement about it is to be able to grow through this relationship, to be able to find Jesus Christ at the center of our lives, to be able to understand and live humbly, to be able to know what it is to give and receive love, and also to care. In the same way, all Christians live a life that is powerful. You see, it did not discourage Nehemiah. It was not about evaluating whether what they were saying was right or wrong. You see, what he actually says is that they are jealous of the work that you're doing. In verse 7 of chapter 4, he says, "Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the wall of Jerusalem were being destroyed and the gaps were beginning to be closed, they become angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion." This is a typical example where my enemy, the enemy of my enemy, becomes my friend. You will watch in life, in business, that even the person that you'd never expect, like the Ammonites and the Ashdodites and the Arabs, these people are sworn enemies. But when they had a common enemy, they came together and they said, "Kom ons vat hom saam." I've seen it with my own eyes, that people have got the most despicable characters, that people claiming to be godly would align themselves with these people because they have an objective, and you of that objective. Know this, in all of this, you'll be tempted to walk away. You'll be tempted to give up your dream. You'll be tempted to give up your studies and say, you know what, Uncle D, I can't do this. This is crazy. I'm working in a very, very volatile racial environment, an ethnic environment, where I'm so frustrated. I've got to head a department where everybody in that department is trying to oppose me and undermine me. And it's not because of anything, but because of me. God is saying to you, don't crumble. Don't walk away. Don't give up. Sometimes opposition has got a way of sticking around, and it just gets tougher. And the tougher it gets, you need to remain even more faithful to God. The problem is this, is that so often, and I want to say this to you, when it gets tougher, what God is trying to do is ask you the question, where is your bottom? Where's the end of your resources? Where is it where you will finally realize that relying on me is not just part of the solution, but is all of the solution? That giving up and giving over to me is what it is about. We live this by this illusion that we can do things in our own strength and by our own wisdom. And I've seen people be successful in that too. But I can tell you now, the very people that live by their own wisdom, they've never realized the power of living by the power of God. And so often we struggle to understand why. Paul will tell us in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he said, we were at a point where we even despaired of our own life, but this happened so that we can learn to rely on God and not on ourselves. God's saying, vulnerability is not something that comes naturally. It is a discipline that comes sequentially after you have to face opposition after opposition and say, maybe this is a good time to give up and walk away and it'll go away. No. The second problem is how to get rid of opposition is to change your focus. So often we find, and I was speaking to Tiziana last night, she says, Uncle D, what is so hard is that this pain is so excruciating that it is all I see, all that clouds my entire world. Isn't that sometimes what happens to us? That's all that you think about. Listen to what this guy does. He takes his focus off these guys, gives it to God, and gets on with his work. And says, I've got a job to do. There's a wonderful saying that says, do not stone the devil's dogs. Don't do it. Leave them to their own devices. God will deal with them. You will watch their demise even though you do not desire it. God deals with people much better than you and I can. The whole time God is saying to you, I'm busy conforming you in the image of my Son. Remain faithful. I want you to chart a course for those who's watching your life, that they can see that inside of your life is one thing written, faithfulness to God, despite the outcome. Don't try to fix it yourself. Because the reason you want to fix it yourself is so that you can walk away and say, I've dealt with it. But you're a child of God. Paul would say, God's weakness, your weakness is God's strength. And that's where it becomes evident. Allow God to be God and you to be you. And know where that boundary starts and stops. At this time, I'd like us to play the second video, and then we can close. It's not as long, by the way. Johan, wil jy net vir ons 'n bietjie daai ligte
The
verdoof?
first wave I caught,
asseblief?
I got pounded, but it felt good. Time seems to move really fast, yet really slow. Every little adjustment seems like it's in slow motion, yet maybe it's just your mind putting you through that because you're going extremely fast.
that is a picture of a wipeout. Don't look at me. I've never surfed I have, but I got the red chest to show for it. But that's about it. I've never been in one of these wipeouts. But I want you to watch the wipeout as she describes, and she says, you know, when I went under, it just kept on tumbling me forward. And you watch how, as it carries on and holds you under, there's some places that have got reefs that scrapes the people onto that reef. But I want you to watch something that she does. She reaches out for her cord, and she pulls the cord, and the ingenuity of being able to have a life vest inside of her swimsuit is profound to see. And she grabs it and she lets air into a life vest, which grabs her and pulls her to the surface of the waves, holds her head out to the sky and out of the water where she can get air. Question on the table is today, are you going to pack your life vest this year? Are you going to pull that cord being your access to God? Or are you going to try to keep going, holding your breath underwater and saying, I can do this, rather than say, I'm in trouble? Pull the cord and let the air take me to the top. The preservation suit that she has is an ingenious invention of those who have experienced the kind of pull of strong water. When we look at the ingenuity of those who have been there, we can see that that's what God's trying to tell us. You tug on that vest and you pull as hard as you can. You pray as hard as you can. And you ask God, Father, I need you to bring me through. I don't know where you are, but I certainly know where I am with God. Are you a child of God's today? Or are you just a fan? Are you still trying to do things in your own strength, or are you already deliberately working in that sacred space of learning how to surrender? Are you learning to become comfortable with your vulnerability? Comfortable with telling God, Father, I don't know anymore. And not feel threatened or less of a man or a woman because you are vulnerable. God delights in his children when they call on him. Our final song has been selected. Let's stand and sing our final song. And I pray God will bless you this week as you forge ahead, open eyes, and be successful. Praise God. Let's stand.